Okay, so hopefully you had some time to think about why diversity matters in computing and why it matters to you in your own context. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the value of diversity to computer science. And I'll start by just saying that it enhances innovation, that when we bring a wider variety of people into IT, and into computing, our ability to innovate is enhanced through the contributions of people with diverse perspectives and the value that the diverse perspectives bring. For example, a study of patents and gender showed that patents granted to mixed gender teams were more highly cited. That is, they were referenced more than those of single gender teams, either male or female, either all male or all female. Another important component of diversity to the field of computing is that it expands the qualified employee pool. It's something that we talked about earlier. If we have the majority of the population is not being tapped to do these important jobs, then we're missing out. But if we include them, if women and other underrepresented people participated, we'd actually just have a larger talent pool to select from, and we'd be able to fill the jobs that currently go unfilled in our economy. So estimates have shown that double or even triple the number of people there would be even double or triple the number of people in the field if we drew from more diverse groups than we currently do. Next, it improves the bottom line. Interestingly enough, technology companies with the highest representation of women in their senior management teams showed a much higher return on equity than did those with fewer or no women in senior management. So if you include women, it's better for the bottom line. A recent study determined that both racial and gender diversity is beneficial for business. Gender diversity is associated with increased sales, more customers, and greater profits. So even if we were just looking at this from a business case, we could say that diversity is important for computing. Diversity is important for our economy more generally, but for the field of computing more specifically. It promotes equality, it promotes inclusion, because technology is playing an increasingly crucial role in the global economy, in the national economy, bringing more kinds of people into the field of technology can help break down gender and racial inequalities, economic inequalities. It can also address the salary gap between men and women. Women's economic health has been shown in hundreds of studies to affect women's health and that of their children. So when we say incorporating women and underrepresented minority groups into the field of computing, because it's such a massive proportion of our economy and such a lucrative proportion of our economy, it can have a lot of really positive knock-on effects. Also, when we think about promoting equality and inclusion, organizations should reflect or need to reflect on some level their customer base. If your user base isn't represented in your design team, how can you really expect to know what your customers want or how they'll use your product? So to have people on your team creating the technology that members of their own groups are going to be using, it makes just a lot more sense to have that reflection happening in your employee pool. Groups with greater diversity solve complex problems better and faster than homogeneous groups. It has been shown that diversity just creates better group dynamics. Group problem solving is improved. So diverse groups can fill the growing number of jobs, and they'll improve the organizations and the fields that they're involved in while they're doing it. So the other thing is that the importance of inclusion in terms of the values of our nation. We are missing out on the contributions of the diverse groups that make up our national population. And so we should think about the importance of inclusion from a national perspective as well, and from the values that we hold as a nation. Also, for global competitiveness, the US needs qualified citizens to do these jobs. We are increasingly in a global economy and on the world stage. Our ability to innovate and to compete is improved by diversity. And so increasing diversity will increase our competitiveness in the global sphere as well. And I'm just going to say something from a sociological perspective. It's irrational. It doesn't make sense to continue to allow these important high-quality jobs to be filled by a small group when so many others could contribute and would succeed as well. And so there is an important sociological component and the sort of rationality of diversity for us on a sort of larger scale. Well, why is there a lack of diversity in computing? It's a really good question. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about this idea of seeing yourself or identifying as a math person or a STEM person or, you know, a science person. Well, there is a lack of knowledge, I think, of what computing actually is. A lot of people really just haven't been exposed to the field and don't really know what computing is all about. There are preconceptions or stereotypes about what people in computing jobs actually do and what computing as a profession is, and who you need to be to do well in computing. There's a lot of stereotyping going on about the kind of person that you would need to be to do well in computing. But the reality is that the assumptions and the misconceptions don't fit the reality. There is this misunderstanding and lack of knowledge about the work itself, what people are doing. So the stereotypes, you know, one of the things that we're going to teach you in this course is that repeating stereotypes or trying to debunk stereotypes isn't such a great thing, because a lot of times what you're doing unknowingly is reinforcing those stereotypes when you repeat them. So I'm not going to repeat, but I think we all can kind of conjure up in our own minds because it exists in our culture. It's just the hum that kind of permeates about who's doing computing and who isn't. And so one of the biggest myths, and one that I will repeat because I think it's so important that we do work towards addressing it, is that the myth that ability is innate. That is, you are somehow born a computer person and that you are good at computing naturally. And so the idea of innate versus learned is something that we are going to be focusing quite a bit on in this particular course. And that is to say that computing ability is not innate, it is learned, and it can be developed. And your intelligence for computing is something that you can grow. And it does not vary by sex, by race, by ethnicity, by disability status, that in fact, everyone can become proficient in computing, and that there is no such thing as innate ability for computing. Okay. So what can we do about it? One of the things that we're going to focus on in this particular course is that we're not just going to kind of focus on the negatives and leave you hanging, that we're actually going to be providing strategies for addressing these issues of lack of diversity and of how to incorporate being more open to people from diverse backgrounds and to engaging them as minority groups, but as a result of that, all groups into the field of computing. So what we find is that when people take our courses and when people do our workshops, what we find is that not only do they increase representation of diversity in their own classes, but they also increase the numbers of students, because when you are working on being focused on engaging students, you're teaching better courses. So some examples of what we are going to be talking about and about what we can do to increase diversity in our courses and in the field as a result. The first is actively recruit for diversity. Don't assume that it's going to take care of itself. Even if you have the best course, and I'm sure that many of you do, not many diverse students will know about it without some sort of action on your part. So you have to get the word out that you are offering a course that is open and amenable to people from all groups. Okay, so we are going to be talking about actively recruiting students. Utilize the research-based best practice retention strategies that will engage your students and sustain their interest. Now, you already know a lot about putting together a great course, so we're not going to be offering you information about sort of curriculum, but we are going to be offering some, we can certainly direct you to some really wonderful curricula, but what we're going to be focusing on in this course is the research-based retention strategies that are aimed at improving diversity in your courses and retaining those students once you get them. Instructors can do a lot to create an environment that fosters interest, confidence, learning, a sense of belonging, and identity. Now, we know that there are lots of things that faculty members can do to develop these features, and that will go a long way towards improving diversity. It's not a secret that, as I said just before, after instructors attend our workshops and our courses and they apply the strategies, you have to apply them, that they increase enrollment of all students. And that's why we often talk about more and more diverse students. A course that develops these interest, confidence, learning, belonging, and identity will be a very good course. We have repeat attendees every year because even just implementing a few new strategies will tend to yield impressive results. And so people return to share their successes and their challenges, and every context is different, and we understand that. So evidence, ideas, strategies that we're going to be discussing in this course, many of them will need for you to adapt them to your particular context. And so you'll have opportunities to work through how some of the strategies that we're suggesting map onto your own location, your own context that you're working on. And so some of the things that we'll talk about in this course are inclusive pedagogy, how to teach in a way that will be more inclusive and most inclusive, stereotype threat and how to avoid it. And you'll also hear a case study about how to implement some of these workshop strategies and how you can work through some of the challenges that you might encounter. So we want to learn about and incorporate into your programs and courses the research-based best pedagogical practices that are most appropriate for your school. Okay, so this is not a one-size-fits-all, but what we do find is that if you take even just a few of the strategies that we're going to be teaching you, you will have really wonderful results and increase and improve diversity in not only in your courses, but in the field as well.